Hello, my name's Valerie. Now, if you're like me, you will enjoy the chance to get a really good cooked breakfast from time to time. A couple of weeks ago, I was staying in a hotel in Lincoln with my son and daughter in law, and yes, we had a couple of splendid breakfasts. A buffet offering the full range of bacon, eggs, sausages, mushrooms, black pudding, grilled tomatoes, hash browns. Have I left anything out? And you do feel very well set up for the day after a breakfast like that. But most of the time, I guess that for most of us, breakfasts are more likely to be a simple bowl of cereal or perhaps a couple of slices of toast, and that nourishes you perfectly well. We were in Lincoln because Malcolm, my son, sings in a choir that covers for cathedral choirs when they're on holiday. It was Pentecost Sunday, and the Eucharist in the cathedral was a splendid event. Wonderful building, inspiring music, an occasion that really reminded the worshipper of the greatness and the splendour of our God. But at the heart of the service, as in communion services wherever we are, however grand or however simple our surroundings, we were invited to eat bread and drink wine and remember that Jesus has promised to feed us as we take part in this simple act. Today is observed in the Church as Corpus Christi, or the Day of Thanksgiving for the institution of the Holy Communion. Of course, every Maundy Thursday we remember how Jesus shared bread and wine with his disciples that evening and said, "Do this in remembrance of me. This bread is my body. This wine is my cup given for you." But on Maundy Thursday, there's so much to think of as we get caught up in the fast-moving events leading up to the death of Jesus. So it's good to have another day when we're invited to pause and think what the Eucharist, the service of Holy Communion, means to us, both as individuals and as it being the most important act of worship for the Church worldwide. If you read last month's Parish Magazine, you'll have come across a passage which was a quotation from Dom Gregory Dix. Let me read you part of it. So he reflects on Jesus sitting at table, sharing bread and wine with his friends, and telling them to do this in remembrance of me. He writes, "Was ever another command so obeyed? For century after century, spreading slowly to every continent and country, and among every race on earth, this action has been done in every conceivable human circumstance, for every conceivable human need, from infancy and before it, to extreme old age and beyond it, from the pinnacle of earthly greatness to the refuge of fugitives in the caves and dens of the earth. Men have found no better thing than this to do for the kings at their crowning, or for criminals going to the scaffold, for armies in triumph, or for a bride and bridegroom in a little country church, for the proclamation of a dogma, or for a good crop of wheat, for the wisdom of the parliament of a mighty nation, or for a sick old woman afraid to die, for a schoolboy sitting an examination, or for Columbus setting out to discover America, for the famine of whole provinces, or for the soul of a dead lover. One could fill many pages with the reasons why men have done this, and not tell 100th part of them. I find that reading this passage makes me want to look back over my life, to think what the Eucharist has meant to me as time has passed, to remember special occasions, significant events in my life, as well as being thankful for being able to experience so many years of being spiritually nourished by just turning up from week to week. And yes, I do see similarities between this and how I started thinking about breakfasts. I can remember some special breakfasts and dinners, of course, usually for big family occasions. And I don't really remember the many hundreds of bowls of cereal I've eaten over the years. But I've been kept nourished by all of them, whether I was conscious of it at the time or not. And I think it can be much the same with communion. Hopefully there'll be occasions when we're filled with joy at the awareness of the presence of God among us. But it may not always be like that. We come as we are, and Jesus welcomes us as we are. And he feeds us, even on those occasions when we know we're not at our best, perhaps a bit tired or distracted, or it's all become a bit of a routine. Today can be an opportunity to ask ourselves what communion, the Eucharist, means to us personally. We may want to say thank you that we're able to come to church together to share in communion, perhaps to remember times when we've been really aware of God's presence and support. But perhaps we may also need to ask ourselves if we've got a bit too casual about it. Are we taking it too much for granted that it's God himself who has invited us to meet him in this way, to remember all that Jesus has done for us, and to be spiritually fed to equip us to live with and for him? Or perhaps it may be that communion has never featured much in your life. You aren't sure that you'd be welcome. Do you belong? Well, I can gladly tell you that here in Portishead, you will indeed be welcomed. We're reminded at each service that the table is the Lord's and that he welcomes everyone who wants to come to him. There are no barriers. And of course, for some people, there are reasons why they can't get to church to take part in a communion service, just as none of us could during the lockdowns when the churches were closed. But we can remember that as well as Jesus inviting us to feed on him through the communion, he gave us another promise when he said, "I will be with you always." May we find that to be true.